Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for those who've just joined, and thank you for your patience just as we were starting up. I'm conscious that I think a few more people are probably going to join. So what I'll do is I'll kick off. I am going to record this session because I'm really keen to sort of post it and help as many people who are in this unfortunate situation as I can. By way of introduction, as it says on the screen, and as I'm sure many of you would have seen, my name's Rob Cross, and I'm the founder of this company called Maru Leadership. And I'll give a fuller introduction in terms of who I am, what I've done, and sort of my perspective on this and where it comes from in a moment. I guess for me, the reason I put this together is I'm conscious that there is a lot of turbulence going on in the world at the moment and a lot of uncertainty. And unfortunately, that's having a flow on impact in terms of people being put at risk going through the redundancy process or finding themselves out of work. And more, I'm a big believer in giving as much of my time to help people as I can because I find myself very fortunate that actually, I have the ability to do that. And so quite often recently, I've been, either helping individuals who've been, put at risk or going through consultation or made redundant, or actually been invited a few times to present to large groups who are all going through consultation with an organisation. And so what I thought I'd do is I'd share the same types of things that I always talk to people about and have used myself as I've gone through this process. And so what's included in this is fundamentally the three steps that I really encourage people to think about as they go through redundancy, as they find themselves without a job. And it's the three steps that I think help you not only survive that process, but really thrive through that process, which I appreciate probably sounds a bit odd when you start it, but actually, I think if you follow them, you can find a whole new perspective in terms of this new adventure, and new path that you're progressing on through your life. So I guess for me, what I've got here is I've got a range of content which I'll share on the screen, and clearly we have, using this we have the chat function and other things. So please, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask over chat, or we'll even open up at the end to give people space to talk. And I guess my view is, or my belief is, if I can help you, I absolutely will. Whether that's something as simple as have a conversation and just talk you through some of the stuff in more detail, or sort of listen to what's going on for you, or review your CVs, or anything that I can do to help people, I'll absolutely do. And so please keep that in mind, and I'll share my details at the end of this, so you know how to get in contact with me. Just recently, and I think it's probably behind me, but I published this book called The Great Man is Dead. And one of the quotes within the book is this concept that, unfortunately for humans, however, the state of anxiety, the state of uncertainty causes more anxiety than living in a state of knowing that a bad thing will happen. And what this says is that as human beings, we're wired for familiarity. We don't like uncertainty. And so the challenge with that is we go into these periods of uncertainty where, we don't know whether we've got a job or not because we're in consultation, or when we've gone through consultation and we find ourselves, being made redundant, we don't know what the future holds. And uncertainty is the worst psychological state that we can live in as human beings. And so when we recognize that, actually what we need to do is we need to find ways to ease some of that uncertainty, because when we're living in an uncertain state, we're not operating at our best. And so what the three steps in this whole content that I'm presenting is all about is how do you ease some of that uncertainty so you get focused on you really understanding where you're going, what you're doing, and using your energy in the most effective way. And my offer to anybody who's watches this or is on this webinar now, if you'd like a copy of my book, I'm more than happy to give them away. I think that The Great Man is Dead, whilst it talks a lot about leadership, fundamentally it's about self-leadership, and how do you take control over your own narrative and the story that you're creating for yourself, and how do you direct your energy in a more mindful way, which I'll explain a little more as we progress through this. So what happens when we lose our jobs? Well, for me, I've experienced this a couple of times, and through my career, I've done a lot of really incredible things, worked right across the world, but a few times I have been made redundant. And part of the reason that I've gone and set up on my own is because I got made redundant out of my last company. I'll openly admit that was by choice. I was happy that it happened because I was ready to move on, but actually it was still unsettling in all the ways that we experience, and I'll explain a lot more about that in a moment. But as a broader introduction to me, I've been on both sides of this. I've been the person being made redundant, and I've also, unfortunately, through my HR role, been the person making other people redundant. And so, through that time, what I really recognise is that actually the change we go through and how we engage with this is deeply personal. And what I mean by that is because actually the experiences that we have at work and what happens to us and what creates this uncertainty doesn't just layer on top of that sort of CV, the experiences that we've got in our career. It layers on top of a full range of experiences that we have in life. And for me, if I give a fuller introduction, I've done all these things. I started my career in the Australian Air Force. And I went through to being an HR director in a company called SIG. As I said, I've worked across the world. Beyond that, though, I've also done some really amazing things in terms of my early development and learning about leadership. And I've also had some extreme tragedy and joy in terms of the death of close friends and raising a family. And the reason I share this in this context is because actually when we talk about uncertainty, we talk about change, we talk about our jobs, we can't just look at that from the context of the job we have and our CV. We have to look at it as an entire life concept in the context of our entire lives. And for me, the more that we can appreciate that, and more that we can appreciate how this level of change impacts us and how it layers on the various experiences that we have in life, the more honest we can be with ourselves about what our reaction to it is, and the more honest we can be in terms of leading ourselves through that reaction. And for me, with all of that story and sharing that, this is fundamentally what Muru leadership and what I do is all about. Because actually, when we get to understand the full human being and the context that we're operating in, we can then start to unlock true human potential. And whilst it might seem a bit odd to be talking about it in this way, often for me, when people go through such a significant change as redundancy, you have a huge amount of uncertainty impacting your life, and you're feeling really confused about what you do next, that could be some of the most rewarding opportunities for you to really shake up your life and to really focus on life in a different way. And as I said, when you're in the mix of it and really challenged by some of those things, it can often think, hang on, Rob, that's ridiculous. But the more and more I work with people in this space, the more it becomes a really powerful catalyst for them to start to redefine their life and how they want to live it, which again, I'll explain as we go through the 3 steps. So that's a bit about me. That's a bit about where I come from. But more than importantly, that's about saying that when we experience this type of change, it's not just about our job, it's about our complete human being, and that's how we show up in the world, who we are in the world, and how we make sense of the world. And so if we think about that, we can start to appreciate that our jobs are a significant part of who we are and what we're all about. And so when we lose our jobs, it's not just saying, actually, we've got an extra 8 to 10 hours a day because we're no longer going into work. Losing our jobs has a profound impact on us. And I think it's important for us to really pause and reflect on what that impact is and start to dissect it a bit more so we can understand how we need to lead ourselves through it. And so within the book, within my theory of the world, I look at the human condition and how humans work. And it starts with talking about behavior. I mean, many of you have probably seen this type of model before, where we describe the human condition as an iceberg. Behavior is what sits above the surface, which is all about, what we say and do. It's what's visible to the world. Motive is what sits beneath the surface, which is all about, values, beliefs, fears. And clearly these things get challenged and activated in times of uncertainty, when all of a sudden, some of the things that we are reliant on and that shapes our behavior start to become threatened. Jobs are a great example. But actually, through my career and through my life, I've noticed that this descriptor of it just isn't enough. We can talk about behavior, that's fine. We can talk about motive, but actually, I've often experienced things where I've seen people compromise their values. I've seen people have irrational fears or create stories about things that just didn't make any sense. And so I created this model which looked a bit deeper, and discovered that actually right at the core of the human condition are a set of inescapable dilemmas for what it means to be a human being. And these are basically the existential drivers of our human behavior. And I call them the human dilemmas. And the reason I raise these now is because actually, when we think about the nature of our employment, our jobs, and what losing our jobs does to us, it's these things that get activated. And if we don't understand them and don't consciously address them, then they can control us, and they can control us in a really unhealthy way. But if we do embrace them, then actually we can start to use the power within them to really help us shape the life that we want to live, which is where you go from surviving redundancy and getting another job through to thriving through redundancy, because it gives you that catalyst to do something different. And so if I quickly touch on the human dilemmas, they start with this concept of mortality and finitude. And the concept of mortality is the fact that we're mortal creatures. Whether we like it or not, we have a biological limitation. And whilst losing our jobs may not necessarily impact our sense of physical mortality, it does absolutely impact our survival, our sense of survival and security. All of a sudden we've had certainty of income, and we've no longer got certainty of income. We then start to worry about how we're going to put food on the table, pay the rent, etc., etc. So it triggers that really primal need of survival within us. Beyond that, it then starts to challenge our sense of identity. And I personally experienced this. I went from being an HR director, which, it was a great title to have if you're into that type of thing, to all of a sudden not having a job and saying, well, what do I describe myself as now? Who am I? And I've seen CEOs who have left organizations no longer being CEOs, still calling themselves a CEO, even though they're not the chief executive of anything. And so, this concept of identity is really fed by the jobs that we do. And when we lose those jobs, it gets shaken because we're actually, well, what do I call myself now? Then we have our sense of meaning. And as human beings, we are meaning-making creatures. We need to have a reason for why things happen. And when we can't find a reason for why, we make it up. It's fate, it's Murphy's Law. It was always going to happen this way. And that's our way of making sense of the world. And when we recognize that actually a lot of our meaning is developed through the stories that we create, we can start to take ownership over those stories. And again, the jobs that we play, the things that we do day to day, and because work consumes so much of our time and energy, it creates a whole sense of meaning for us that when that's not there, all of a sudden you have a vacuum that you need to fill. And then fourthly, I should say, is that we have freedom, and human beings have this paradoxical relationship with freedom. We have a desperate desire for freedom, but then a fear of it, because, you can go, okay, my job, I resent the fact that I've got to commute. Well, we used to commute, an hour and a half each day or whatever it was, and be up early, etc., etc. But actually that lack of freedom gives us real drive because it gives us something to do. When that's taken away, the lack of freedom is taken away, and you're given freedom to say, well, what do I do next? That can feel really daunting because all of a sudden you have a range of opportunities in front of you that you have to make sense of. And then finally, unfortunately for us as human beings, no matter how close we get to other human beings, we're confronted by this isolation, this fact that, that we have to deal with all these things, for ourselves and by ourselves. And so I can go down and ask my wife, my friends, my family what I should do next, but ultimately it's me that's got to decide. And so within that, I appreciate that's pretty deep, and I presented this to somebody the other day and I said, well, Rob, that's hardly a TED talk, right? It's not a deeply inspiring, motivational thing to talk about. And I think that's probably right, but it's still there. And the more I work with people in this space and work with leaders, in all sorts of contexts, the more I see these things get activated, especially in times of uncertainty and change. And so the more we can understand them, the more we can then use them to influence our motive and the activation of our motive and then our behavior. And the more we can use them as a powerful catalyst and driver for what we do next and how we shape our lives. And so if that's what's happening to us and that's all going on in here for us as human beings, how does that manifest itself? And I think for me, it fundamentally manifests itself in some type of emotional journey that we all go through. And I'm sure anybody who has spent any time in the corporate world will know the classic sort of Kubler-Ross change curve that you see there, you know, where we go from sort of denial to opposition to exploration and engagement. And I'm sure if you've seen The Simpsons, you'll see Homer Simpson has gone through this. There's always great YouTube clips of people dealing with it. And the more I've spent time, both myself going through major change, you know, especially in terms of employment and other things, and I've worked with people on helping them make sense of it through contexts like this, or unfortunately having made people redundant, I think this journey is absolutely real. You know, you go through this phase of going, actually, it's not really going to happen. It's not going to be me. It's going to be everybody else. Oh, hang on, it is going to be me. And you go into this opposition. Actually, that's not right. That's unfair. I can't do this. Then you go, hang on, it is happening. What do I do next? And eventually you can move into this place of engagement. And so I think that emotional journey is very real and something that I see people go through in a far more intense way because of losing their jobs and other changes that they go through because of all of what we've seen on the previous slide. But against that, and the reason I think we need to be really conscious of the human dilemmas is because the journey doesn't look like that. We can cut it up into this lovely 2x2 matrix, you know, that's the type of thing that McKinsey would use. But in actual fact, the journey looks like this. It's messy, it's complex. You can go from a place of feeling like you're in exploration and going, yeah, okay, I can make sense of this. And then you go, oh crap, you know, a new bill comes in. What am I going to do with that? How do I deal with it? And so for me, I think this appreciation that we go through an emotional journey because the human dilemmas are being activated that's driving our motive and our behavior is really important to recognize. But the second thing that's really important to recognize is that change is messy, it's complex, it's disturbing. And to have that acknowledgement means that we can be far more honest with ourselves in terms of how we engage with it and how we be kind to ourselves about the emotions that we experience. Because I've seen certain people, and I'll share a story as we go through this, but I've seen certain people who've been put at risk, made redundant, who've allowed anxiety about what they do next to rule their lives. And they've done that for a variety of reasons, but that's meant that they've never moved through this channel. They've just got kind of stuck in opposition and denial and churned all of their energy in that space, as opposed to going, okay, this is happening. What am I going to do next? You know? And I guess that that really leads into the 3 steps, because fundamentally what the 3 steps are giving you is a mechanism to take control, to recognize that all of this uncertainty that's been created and the fear or the realization of losing your job has created this energetic response. So I've got now new energy and new focus. It's then what do I do with that? And what I'm going to present now is hopefully some tools to help you focus that energy in a far more effective way to help you take the next steps as you move through the next part of this next phase in your journey. So in terms of questions, I haven't seen anything come up so far. But if you do have any questions, please raise them on the Q&A, and I'll be sure to answer them. You've got something here. Excellent. Yeah. So in terms of the book, please do with the book. I'll give a bit more instructions about this. If you'd like a copy, if you like anything else, I'll definitely share all of my details, and really happy to help people where I can. In terms of the 3 steps, so as I said, when we experience change, especially something so fundamental as losing our jobs, we get this new sense of energy. it spikes very quickly as we go through the process, and then starts to diminish as we move into a new routine. And so for me, it's about recognizing that that energy has been created and starting to use that in a way that helps us get clearer direction and and greater focus in terms of what we're going to do next. And the 3 steps that I always share with people are these, and I'll go through each of them in more detail as in a moment. But step 1 is get really practical. You know, because redundancy and losing our jobs triggers that survival instinct that we have. It gets to the core of the human dilemmas. What we've got to do is figure out how we respond to that first. Because if you don't respond to that first, you're going to feel constantly anxious about that being triggered. And so step 1 is about how do we get practical and start to deal with some of that. Step 2 is then saying, let's create a plan. Let's get focused on what I'm going to do next, and more importantly, get creative in that. And I think the way the world is today, and again, I appreciate this probably sounds a bit far-fetched, but I think the world is creating as many opportunities as threats. And again, step 2, it's about really recognizing where those opportunities are and being creative about it. And what I call is about being non-binary, not being stuck in a particular frame of reference, and instead being a bit more creative and using some thought experiments to really challenge us. And then step 3 comes back to being really focused on the human dilemmas, and it's used as the core model. And step 3 is all about discovering yourself. So if I'm getting practical, I know how I kind of survive. Step 2 is about getting creative and creating a plan for where I'm going to go. Step 3 is about using this time to do some soul searching and to get some real clarity on who you are and what you're all about. And so what I'll do is let me step through each of these again. If there's anything in there that you want me to pause on, reflect, I'll keep checking the chat and checking the Q&A and respond to that. And if I can, what we'll do is we'll open up for questions at the end. So step 1, it's all about getting practical. So the first thing that I always do personally and working with people is just ask this question that's about money. And money is one of those things that people are often find awkward to talk about. But it's basically saying, let's get really clear on dealing with the anxiety about survival. How long can you survive without an income? And that's effectively saying, how much money do I have in the bank divided by my monthly expenses? And what I encourage people to do is to say, and so what does that mean in terms of number of months that you can survive without an income? And for me, for some might seem a bit crass, for some might seem pretty obvious. It becomes really important because that becomes the comfort blanket, as it says at the bottom, for you to take some of the anxiety out of your existence. And so the more you can then stretch that by looking at point 2, what can I change to extend this time? The more you can extend your comfort blanket. And so I always say to people, right, okay, what are you getting in terms of your redundancy? What have you got in the bank? What are your monthly expenses? How many months can you live? You go, okay, so I think I can live 4 months or whatever it might be. Right, now let's take an underlying assumption. Do you believe you can survive for 4 months? Do you believe that you could find an income within 4 months? And let me use the word income loosely. And I go, well, yeah, probably. Of course I could. Okay. So all of a sudden you start to ease some of that anxiety because you've given yourself some time and you know what your comfort blanket is. And the more you can focus on 1 and 2 and manage that through the process, the more you can prevent that anxiety getting the better of you and prevent that anxiety from triggering some of the other human dilemmas that are going on for us. I think the point 3 then is also, from a practical perspective, being really clear about the things that you need to put in place that companies would naturally provide for you. So a simple thing for me, when I took redundancy, I have a young family, 2 young children, and married, and a mortgage and all that wonderful stuff. And whilst I'd sort of done my 1 and 2 calculations about how many months, the critical thing for me was death in life cover, death in service cover that, you naturally get when you're employed. You go, hang on, so if I unfortunately get hit by a bus, where does that leave my family? So I immediately went and got life insurance, life cover, and bumped it up, which sort of gave me the comfort that I wasn't going to leave anything out. And so, this step 3 is about saying, actually, what are the other things that I really just need to get focused on from a very practical level that, again, build my comfort blanket and ease my anxiety. And then point 4 is saying, and what are my fallback plans? So if I get to month 3 and I'm starting to see all of my savings disappear, etc., what should I do next? Where else could I go? What else could I do? And that step 4 is, again, getting really practical, knowing what your steps are about how you're going to resolve it. So, I mean, for me, anybody who's listening to this, in amongst all the other things that you're doing, and we'll talk about that, I really encourage you to go back if you haven't done this and get really practical so that you ease anxiety, because that anxiety can be quite powerful as a driver, but not necessarily driving you in the right direction, especially when we get to steps 2 and 3. And the more you can ease that, the more you can get really practical about how you're going to live, what that's going to look like, what your fallback plans are, what your level of comfort is going to be, or comfort blanket is going to be. The more you can then invest your energy in the other things that you need to do. So let me just check the, there's nothing on the chat. So step 2 then is, if we started to build our comfort blanket, step 2 is about creating a plan. And I appreciate this probably sounds obvious, but this concept that sits within that about not being binary is often what I see and have felt the pressure myself. So that, it's very easy for me to sit there and talk about this, but, I've also felt this pressure. It's very easy to feel like you're in a sense of panic and you've got to do something. And there was a particular guy that I worked with who I was a mentor to, and unfortunately in the business that I was the HR director for, we ended up having to make some pretty significant redundancies. This guy was put at risk, and he just panicked. I mean, he absolutely freaked, and he did so for all the reasons that you can anticipate: concerns about his house, well-being, family, etc. And the unfortunate thing for him is that panic then sort of thrust him into a world where he didn't necessarily have control over what was going on. And he became really quite blinkered about what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. And so for me, there's something here around step 2, which is all about go slow to go fast. And what I mean by that is that, the first thing I encourage anybody to do is, if you're going through consultation, you're being made redundant, is to actually take a break. And you can define what that is. Clearly, in the midst of the COVID crisis, that becomes a little more challenging. But the concept of taking a break is all about letting go of anything you might still be carrying. Because from a recruiter's perspective, and again, I've done a lot of recruitment in my time, is it when somebody's carrying stuff over from their previous job, whether that's frustration and anger about being made redundant, or resentment, or whatever, it's obvious and it really detracts from their experience. And so for me, the ability to take some time out, clear your head, don't worry about going for a job, don't worry about your CV, don't worry about any of that, just go and relax, take some time off and let it go. And as we know for ourselves on holidays, it takes 2 or 3 days to really allow your brain to let go of some of the stuff. And I think for me, that becomes really critical. The second one is then, when you start your planning process, start by asking yourself, what are all the full range of options for how I could generate income? And again, that might sound a bit crass and not necessarily connected to what's in step 3. But the reason I encourage people to think about it as income is because it purely relates to that anxiety and that survival instinct. And what I encourage people to do here is not to be binary, is to be really creative and say, well, how are all the ways, what are the full range of options that I could have to generate income to keep myself surviving? What are all the different ways, and how much income could I get? How easy is that to get to, etc.? Not what is the job I want and how am I going to get that job? Think big, think creative. And the more you do that, the more you start to open your mind up to different opportunities, and you become, less binary, as it says. And recently, I was having a conversation with somebody who's been looking for work for a while, and it became really apparent to me that they trapped themselves in a particular perspective around jobs. And the thought experiment that I gave them to do was to say, okay, you're clearly limiting yourself because you only want that job. You only want that job, and that job's not appearing, which is then sending you into a bit of a spiral of negativity and a drain on your self-belief. Why don't we assume that you're never going to get that job? You're never ever going to get that job. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? I mean, well, I don't know. Well, I could do this and this and this. And as he spoke, you could hear this energy starting to fire off in terms of who he was and what he wanted to do. And it was really exciting. And so for me, this concept about generating income as opposed to having a job or having a particular job, get creative, blow it out, and, do whatever you need to do to get creative, whether it's big pictures on walls or whatever, but really think about all the options, because you'll be really surprised at what you see and what you experience. And use thought experiments like you're never going to get a full-time job again or whatever it might be, just to trigger a different thought. It doesn't mean that you limit and not focus on that as well. It just means that you remove the blinkers and you look at a broader range of stuff. And then 3, against that is then saying, okay, so these are all my options. How do I start to build my network? And I think that even in the virtual world, there's so many people out there who are willing to help, willing to have conversations. And I think that's one of the wonderful reactions to COVID that we've seen, is that humanity has started to flourish and people are more willing to help each other. And I think the more you can build your network across each of these areas, drawing in other insight and opinion, other views, the more that you can really expand your perspective and find other opportunities. And again, linking that to 4, the more you can look for ways of developing yourself, building up your vocabulary, building up your knowledge base of other things that are going to help you really explore some of these options more meaningfully. And I think number 5 within that is then all about saying all about how do you maintain your self-care, and it's hard not to be on social media and see all of the evidence about challenges to our mental health and our overall health and well-being. And for me, this concept of caring for self is, 1, being kind to yourself in terms of where you are and what's happening, and 2, being really conscious about what are the things that you need to do to stay fit, healthy and focused, and keeping up certain routines around diet, exercise, sleep. All of those things are really critical and need a lot of discipline, which is easy to drift off as you've been in the journey for a while. But this number 5 of caring for self is absolutely critical. And ultimately, the thing that I share with people the most is that actually, when you were in work and doing your job, you were clearly really good at certain stuff. You need to do more of that outside of it. You need to be creative. You need to be focused. You need to be disciplined. You need to focus on delivery. You need to be creative, etc., etc. And I think the more you can bring all of that stuff of what makes you great into this world, the more you can take that energy that you've got, enhance it and direct it in the right way. And by doing that, then all of a sudden you start to create something really special. So hopefully what you're getting from me through that process is that actually the first thing to do is get practical. Get practical, know how long you can survive, ease some of that anxiety that's driven by that central human dilemma. And then once you've eased some of that, is to get focused by creating a plan and get creative with that plan. And for me, that's really important, because actually through that plan, you can start to take the blinkers off and think about all the range of options and start to really address them. And as I said through my story, using thought experiments to really challenge yourself so you don't get too caught in a particular way of thinking, is really, really quite important. And it means that you can also be better at assessing the various options that have become available to you as to what they're fulfilling and how they're serving you in terms of who you are and what you're all about. And I know for me, and I appreciate it wasn't in the COVID period because it was happening a couple of years ago, but I always said that if I got made redundant, I would go out independent and set up my own business. And all of a sudden I'm being made redundant. And it's like, oh crap. I mean, I've got to do this now. I mean, I've been sort of saying it as if it's a hollow threat for many years. And all of a sudden the world has forced me to do it. And I found that journey really tough because all of a sudden you've still got the pull of the corporate world, the jobs, people talk to you about it. You've still got all these other things that are going on. And I deliberately gave myself space to look at the options that are available to me and then start to explore each of them. But, that's very easy to say, but the more you can step back and do it and have the discipline to do it, the more powerful it is for you. And so where that takes us, if we've got practical, we've started creating a plan, then actually the other thing that we should do is start to focus on who we are. And for me, that's about really connecting in and embracing the human dilemmas and getting some clearer definition about who we are and what we're all about. And as it says at the bottom there, this is all about building real courage and conviction in self. And the reason this is important, and again, it might feel like a bit of a luxury to do when you don't have the income and the usual things that go with redundancy, is that there's kind of no better time to do this, to do some real soul searching about who you are and what you're all about. And it becomes all the more important because when you think about what you're going to do next and the opportunities start to present themselves, and they will, you can present a better story towards those opportunities in terms of attracting them and people being attracted to you, but also you can be a lot more discerning about what they mean to you and whether they're worth pursuing. And so within The Great Man is Dead, and you'll see it on my website and other places, I use this concept of the 3 questions. And the 3 questions, although really appearing quite simple, are immensely powerful because they tap directly into the human dilemmas, these things that sit at the core of the human condition that are driving us. That they tap into these existential drivers of human behavior, and the more you can really embrace them, the more you can use them as power for good in terms of who you are and what you're going to do. And so again, really happy to share this in terms of my book and anything else I can share with people. But the 3 questions start with asking, who am I? And whilst that seems quite simple, this question of, well, what is my authentic identity? Who am I really? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? How do I want to present myself? And where do I feel most comfortable? And how do I develop that and make sure I feel authentic about it? And authentic means being honest with ourselves about who we are, being congruent in terms of that being how other people experience us. And by asking that question of who am I, we start to lay a foundation of a really clear sense of identity. And more importantly, through that clear sense of identity, a real comfort in our own skin. We know who we see in the mirror and we like that person, which seems odd to say, but I mean, I think we all know that as we've gone through our lives, that's not always the case. And so once we've started to answer that, who am I, we then move to the second question, which is fundamentally, why am I here? What is important to me in my life and what brings me meaning and purpose in my life and for my life, And I don't think this is about saying what's my grand life purpose and having some fundamental why for why you exist. It's about saying what's really important to you. And I have a guy called Richard Croft, who I suspect may even be on this webinar. But he asked me a fabulous question when I first was being made redundant. He asked me, Rob, what's your perfect week look like? And I mean, on the surface, that sounds like a really simple question, but that got to the core of this question of why am I here? Because it really forced me to say, actually, and how do I want to live? Which leads to the third question, to really bring what's important to me to life. I have a young family. I don't want to be away from for 3 or 4 nights a week, which was what I was in a corporate job, away from them. You know, I love learning. I love doing all these things, and I love helping people. So that's why I'm here. And I need to serve that, because that's what brings me fulfillment. And I think the more you can pause to really ask that, the more that you can get focused on really answering those questions for what brings you meaning and purpose in your life and also for your life. And as I said there, you know, once you've got that definition of who I am and why I'm here, and these things evolve, they don't just come to you in a snap. You know, you can then start to ask this question about, well, how will I lead and live? Which is all about, how will I focus my time and energy? How will I direct that in a way that brings that to life for me? And for me, you know, this final part of discovering self is about taking the time to use that newfound time that you've got, that newfound energy, to really get to the core of who you are and why you're here, and then how you're going to live and lead in your life to really bring that to life. And I think the more you can do that, the more you can lay a clearer foundation for who you are and what you're going to do next. The more you can explore that range of opportunities with more authenticity and less anxiety, and the more you can start to pave the way for the next steps in your life. And again, I mean, I appreciate that a lot of that probably sounds a bit fluffy and but I've seen and helped a lot of people with this, and I've lived it myself. And the more I see people really engage with these 3 steps, and then especially these 3 questions, I constantly find myself amazed and delighted at what they create. You know, I see people take real ownership over their lives. I see people get creative with what they're going to do, and let go of some of the classic paradigms that they get stuck in. And I think for now, you know, when you've been made redundant and you're thinking about what you're going to do next, providing you've done steps 1 and 2, you then can move into step 3 to start to really explore who you are, why you're here, and how you're going to lead and live. And you'll find that actually step 3 will then really start to influence step 2, and where you start to direct your energy against the plan that you've got. And so I guess with all that, I quickly just check the chat. Oops. The 3 steps hopefully just give you some clearer ways to focus your time and energy on what you're going to do, how you're going to, you know, make sense of, you know, redundancy, losing your job, but more importantly, how you're going to thrive through it. I think through those 3 steps, what you're also given is these 3 powerful questions that help you kind of lead and live with greater authenticity, greater purpose, and greater mindful intention. And I appreciate that when you're having that central human dilemma of mortality and survival triggered, this might feel a bit distant, but it's kind of the ideal time to really stop and consider it. And I had this wonderful experience the other day where, kind of out of the blue over Instagram, I had a message come to me from a guy who's early 20s in the States, completely random, had seen a post, and we got into a bit of a conversation. I sent him a copy of my book for free. And it came back with this wonderful message just about, you know, saying, you know, I never thought 3 simple questions would be so hard to ask and so confronting to ask. And he says, because I look in the mirror every day, and then to ask myself those 3 questions in the mirror actually forced me to think differently about my life, and has given him a whole new perspective and a whole new path of what he's going to do next. And so that for me is about, you know, leading and living in our own lives with greater authenticity, purpose, and mindful intention. And I think the more you can do that, the more you can direct your energy in a particular way and a more mindful way as you're going forwards. I saw something come up on the chat, so let me see if I can, oops. Okay. So the question says, hi Rob, is there a need maybe to do a bit of the first 3 to help you with the planning stage? And I think that's a really great question. Thank you, Richard. And my sense is that I think you do number one first, because I think of the three steps, that getting practical, I think it's really important to do that first so you ease some of the anxiety. And whenever people talk to me about, I've been made redundant, what am I going to do? Rob, can you look at my CV? So let's pause that for a moment. Let's get practical. Where are you? What's driving your behavior? How long can you live, etc. And I always start there because it forces people to just get really considered about their circumstance and what's going on for them. Then I think between steps 2 and 3, creating a plan and defining self, absolutely, I think that can be part of the iterative process. I tend to encourage people to focus on step 2 before leaping too heavily into step 3. And the simple reason for that is, I think, again, when you lose your job, you haven't got an income, you're still driven by anxiety, and the more you can ease that anxiety, the more you can then start to move into the 3 questions as we see on the screen. And I think that part of the way you ease that anxiety is get practical and get a plan. And the focus here is, that somebody said, lovely statement that said, when the sales aren't up, the rudder doesn't work. And for me, that create a plan is all about getting the sales up, getting some focus, and getting some options at what can be in front of you. And then once you've got that energy, then you can start to shift into discover self in the 3 questions. But that becomes 2 and 3, and then probably into 1 becomes an iterative process where it continues to build upwards in terms of energy and focus. Hopefully, Richard, that helps in terms of answering the question. I think if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Please put it onto the chat function, the Q&A function, or the chat. I think for me, I appreciate that when you get caught in the middle of redundancy or have to go into consultation, it's challenging and it creates uncertainty and feel anxious about it. But hopefully by going through the three steps and then answering the 3 questions, it starts to give you a different perspective on how you take all of that energy that's been created and really start to focus it going forwards. And again, the more you can do that, the more you can create a bit more of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you're searching, and eventually you find it. And I appreciate that some of that can feel a bit exhausting, but for me, it's about having the discipline and focus to do it, underpinned by this evolving definition of who you are that really starts to help you and really starts to help you not only just survive, but more importantly, to thrive through the redundancy process. If there's no more questions, what I'll do is I'll close off the session. I'm going to share this recording and I'll put it up onto YouTube and then share it via social media and probably on my website, etc. But as you can see, please, my details are on the website, or my email address is just simply rob.cross@maruleadership.com. As I said, I'm really delighted and happy to help people, anybody who watches this, whether on the webinar now or via YouTube. If I can help people, if I can do simple things like review CVs, or just if you want to chat about some things, whether it be this content or other things, please let me know, and I'm really happy to make the time. And if you would like a copy of my book, whether in print version, as you see there, or in audio version, or whatever format you'd like, please let me know. I'm really happy to share it, all for free. Because for me, this is about the journey that you're on, and the more I can help people on that journey, then I absolutely will. So for those people who've joined, thank you very much for your time. I hope it's been useful to you. Remember, there's 3 steps to go through: get practical, create a plan, and define self. And once you start to do that, you start to ease the anxiety that you're feeling. And more importantly, you start to take the energy that comes with this newfound state and direct it in a more mindful way. And through doing that, I've got no doubt you'll be surprised at what you achieve. And for anybody who's watching this by YouTube, once it gets posted, please feel free to get in contact if you need it, and I'm really happy to help. But thank you very everybody for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.